I was formerly, I got my bachelor's from UW-Madison in molecular biology and botany. So I really always had, I think, a horticulture passion, definitely. But that led into commercial row crop production where I actually focused on alternative crops and wheat systems out in South Dakota. So corn and soybean was a natural part of that. And coming back to Illinois, that was what my job was primarily, was to work with commercial row crop growers and those types of systems up here in Northern Illinois. And then the Farm Bill.
Hey guys, it's Mandy with Global Hemp Association. I wanted to say thank you so much for joining. I'm excited about the opportunity to build a relationship and connect this supply chain. I mean, after all, that's why we started the association. Our association was built on the foundation of connecting supply chain, building relationships, and helping you grow your business. Anyone from farmers, manufacturers, and distributors, people that are passionate about the supply chain, and those creating products selling into biofuels, plastics, textiles, construction, and building materials.
And we're live. Hello, Phillip. It's good to see you.
Good morning. Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Welcome, everybody. As you guys log in, let us know where you're logging in from. I've been on calls all morning working on grant stuff. I know, like a lot of other people in the industry right now, going after grants, but I see you. I feel you right now. Everybody that is up against this deadline. So I hope that, our industry really makes an impact this go around on these grants. But I want to say hello to everybody as you guys do get logged in. Like I said, let us know where you're logging in from. I'm excited about this interview right now. We get to talk about commercial agriculture, where I really see hemp playing a big role. And so I'm really excited about the work that you're doing, Phillip. But I also want to remind everybody we have another meeting here this afternoon as we're going to talk about Ecuador's market, as Global Hemp Association is looking at the global markets and, all of our countries in Latin America and, I guess Mexico, Cuba, Chile, all of those down there are legalizing. And so it's getting pretty exciting. Anyways, so I want to get started. I feel myself rambling. And really, we're here to hear about what Phillip's up to with the University of Illinois. So Phillip, do you mind telling us a little bit who you are? What are you up to? What are you working on?
Sure. So Phillip Alberti, I'm a commercial agriculture educator with the University of Illinois. First off, I'm really happy to be here. It's exciting. It's always great to get an opportunity to share the work that we're doing here in the Midwest. But I work in commercial row crops primarily, formally educated in corn, soybean production. But over the last few years have really taken on a role with industrial hemp, both in cannabinoids and in the grain and fiber space, kind of just keeping my hands on all things research for the University of Illinois and across the Midwest. So I work with what we call the Midwestern Hemp Research Collaborative, which is a group of researchers from several different land grant institutions in the Midwest. That's the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, Michigan State University, Purdue University, and University of Wisconsin-Madison. And so me and my colleagues, our cohorts, we all just stay up to date on the work that we're doing and try to organize our research efforts so we're all speaking the same language, we're putting the reports out and getting that information where it really needs to go.
Very, very nice. So tell me a little bit about your background, some of the big projects you did, and then where it really is overlapped in what you're doing now.
Well, I mean, I was formerly, I got my bachelor's from UW-Madison in molecular biology and botany. So I really always had, I think, a horticulture passion, definitely. But that led into commercial row crop production where I actually focused on alternative crops and wheat systems out in South Dakota. So corn and soybean was a natural part of that. And coming back to Illinois, that was what my job was primarily, was to work with commercial row crop growers and those types of systems up here in Northern Illinois. And then the Farm Bill happened and we needed to address the need. And part of the mission of Extension is to address the needs of our stakeholders and, to provide impact-based programming based off of their needs. And so, as you can imagine, when hemp was first legalized, there was a tremendous amount of information that people were looking for. And so I put on an event. And before you know it, I was getting called a hemp expert and really had to take my time to try to become one of the best that I possibly could. So there was this huge opening for research opportunities for staff at the university. And I wanted to be kind of the person who was taking charge on that and really working with growers across the state to figure out this new industry and determine what their needs were and how we could address those. So going from commercial row crops and then this huge gold rush of cannabinoid production, where it was a little different than the types of systems I was normally working with, but still a lot of those producers, our row crop farmers, were very interested in this crop. And so that was kind of the overlap for me, is where I had these very experienced, very knowledgeable, smart growers who were modifying equipment to do something that we never had really done before. And that's where I kind of crossed over into this space and where I started working with growers in cannabinoids and also in grain and fiber. But that's really been kind of a shift over the last few years, is moving from the cannabinoid type research, which we're still doing extensively, but also getting more into the grain and fiber, bringing in more groups, more organizations and partners to really start to figure out a way to make this a sustainable crop in the region.
Okay, and give me some of the experience or feedback that you're getting as you're really developing the industrial side of this, right? What are some of those partners? What are some of the big markets you're focused on? Yeah.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think we're still figuring out what those are. I mean, here in Illinois, here in the Midwest, and just in my proximity, we have a large amount of livestock production, which puts a heavy interest into hemp as grain, hemp as food. And I mean, while there is still a tremendous interest in hemp as a fiber, there's been a lot of interest in this area, just given where we are. We see pockets starting to form depending on the types of processing that are available, depending on the types of systems that are already in place. So whereas, for example, you're seeing fiber into decortication potentially starting to occur in places like Texas, where they have cottonization and kind of those systems that can already potentially use hemp as a fiber into those end products. We're also seeing a lot of interest here, again, in grain for animal feed, even though we still have some challenges and are way off from figuring that out. But right now, best management practices. How do we still grow this crop? It's new to us still. We are still trying to figure out which varieties we can grow here. And then how do we grow this? What is the best management practice to get this not only from in the field and harvest it and get a high quality fiber, but something that can actually be used into secondary or tertiary products?
Okay, so just a minute ago, you said there are some variables based on, oh, I'm so sorry, based on resources that the farmer themselves have. What are some of those? When we look at scale, what is the size of acreage needed typically before they're investing in their own equipment? Where are they going if they're a small farmer, and what size is that farmer, by chance, for acreage before they're, are they going to other co-ops to borrow or to rent equipment? What are you seeing as far as development of scalable acreage?
I suppose it depends on what you're looking at. If we're focusing on, grain and fiber, we have a lot of the machinery, the equipment for planting and harvesting in some respects that fit the other traditional commercial crop systems, right? So a grain drill, for example, is something that we use to plant grain fiber hemp. But modified corn planters or soybean planters have been used as well. We're seeing a lot of ingenuity in that regard. Same thing with harvesting of the fiber. There's some adjustments that need to be made, and definitely there's some equipment that's coming out that's really made specific for hemp to reduce fiber wrapping and things of that nature. But we're seeing growers figure things out with their traditional equipment. When it comes down to cannabinoid hemp, though, there's been a lot of changes, I think, in the last few years, too. I mean, we started off, that was the huge rush. We had growers who were doing a variety of things. They were starting seeds and transplanting them, much like a horticultural crop, or they were trying to spend more money on seed, but less on labor, and do some direct type seeding with modified equipment. But that definitely presented its challenges, and at $1, $2 a seed at the time when this was happening, it was definitely a challenge. And now those things have changed since this has happened. Prices for seed and inputs have gone down, but also the market's changed dramatically. I mean, the number of acreages that we were assuming growers were going to grow in 2019, 5, 10, 20, is more like a lot of growers growing less than 1 acre, less than 5 even, and then and that's cannabinoid hemp. But with grain and fiber, I think we're still figuring out what that is. Like, growers want to try it and they want to do it on a scale, but they also don't want to put a lot of risk into it because the markets are still developing unless they have a place to go with it. And we're seeing things like that happen in the Dakotas and Minnesota, I believe, Missouri is developing processing, but right here in Illinois, at least in the Midwest, it's still trying to figure out what that means. And until we can get some stable processing, the amount of acreage that a typical grower might grow could change dramatically.
Okay, so can you speak to me about harvesting equipment, and acres typically for a farmer to bring on their own processing equipment or harvesting equipment? What is that typically? When does that transition happen?
I think that's a little bit beyond, my scope, Mandy. I think, for the most part, I'm a humble agronomist trying to figure out how we grow this crop. And so those types of things, I think, are a little bit beyond me. But certainly where we're seeing strength in numbers is with co-ops forming or private-public partnerships, growers coming together to try to say, all right, if we put this processing facility here, we can grow it ourselves, we can process it ourselves. But trying to raise those funds has definitely been a challenge. And I can think of, more than I can count on both of my hands, how many times I heard of a highly promising grain fiber processing plant that just couldn't come together, whether it was due to grant issues, as we've discussed, and just difficulties getting those things together, difficulty getting machinery over. A lot of times it's not coming from the States, it's having to be imported in. And then, just access to actually turning that material into something once it's decorticated, because that's not the end, that's just the beginning, really. And then you need to find a market for where those products are going to go. Are they going to be cottonized, put into textiles? Are we using this for construction materials? Is this going to animal bedding? There's a lot of end uses, but making sure you understand that decorticating and getting it to a specification that can actually be used after you've grown it, after you've done your primary processing, is really going to, contribute to all those factors.
Absolutely. Okay, so LinkedIn user, I don't know who you are, but hello, and thank you everybody else that's been joining. But grow trial data is usually available for other major agriculture crops, which helps limit that uncertainty, which I think we're heading there for cannabis. So I think this goes back to kind of projects you've been working on, and what I really want to talk a lot about are your seed trials and your data that you've been able to collect and provide. Can you dive into this and what it looks like on behalf of the industry?
Sure thing. And I would like to just kind of quickly address that question because, specifically when it comes down to us having access to the data from these trials, we are still getting better at doing these trials. And I can tell you from our experience, we've grown hemp for grain and fiber the last 3 years here at the University of Illinois. This is the first year we've had that seed in April. And that to actually get it planted and do a true trial the way we want to do, I feel like although we've been growing it for the last couple of years, this is the first year we're going to have that opportunity, if Mother Nature decides to agree with us here, that we're actually going to be able to do this. For example, here at the university, we're finally going to be able to do a planting date study. So, we've only been able to get our plants planted in late May, early June, which is not what you want for a fiber crop by a long shot. You lose all that growth before it starts to go into flowering. So this year we're going to have late April, early May, late May plantings. And then on top of that, a variety trial with that will be planted later on in May when the conditions are a little bit more favorable, and we can really get a good true evaluation of how these varieties are performing. So you're exactly right, LinkedIn user. We are getting better at doing these trials. We're getting more efficient on when they're coming into us and where we can actually use this data or use these varieties to create good data that growers can rely on. So back to the projects that we're working on. I mean, we have a variety of stuff that we're working on here at the University of Illinois. DK Lee is our crop science faculty member at the University of Illinois, who is kind of heading up these trials for us on campus, looking at a variety of things, from variety performance to best management practices, things like planting dates, fertility, row spacing. All of these things are going to be evaluated this year. And this is also part of a larger regional study that we're doing, again, with those universities that I mentioned, Michigan State, UW-Madison in Wisconsin, and then Purdue in Indiana, where we're trying to get on the same page. We're trying to send varieties to similar and then yet different locations to really find areas of overlap or microclimates where these varieties might perform better. And then there's also the breeding programs that are going on right now, where we are starting to incorporate feral germplasm from feral or, ditchweed, as they call it, and then crossing that with some cannabinoid type hemp to develop true dual purpose lines that are bred for the photoperiods found in the Midwest. So a lot of stuff on the grain and fiber side that we're working on, which is more university focused, where we're doing this at the university research stations. But as far as CBD hemp or CBG cannabinoid type hemp, we run a project called the Cultivar Check program. And this is it's like all these projects, is a multi-state collaboration, but it's also a partnership with private laboratories, of which there are 3, and then our grower cooperators across the Midwest. And we started by developing what is called the Midwestern Hemp Database. And what this was a response to much needed information in a short period of time, where during the 2020 growing season, we worked with growers who collected agronomic information for us, and they sent in samples for cannabinoid determination at a significantly discounted rate. The only asterisk for that was that they had to allow us to share that data anonymously. And we put that data into what was called the Midwestern Hemp Database. We had flowering dates, we had plant yields, production practices, but most importantly, the bread and butter is cannabinoid development for these varieties. And so over the first 2 growing seasons, we've had 180 growers participate. We have almost 1,400 samples which were submitted. And what we did is we utilized the data from the database to make a series of varieties that we thought were good potential, ones that we wanted to study further, more intensively with grower participation. So we applied for a SARE, Sustainable Agriculture Research Education Partnership Grant, which we received, and was very fortunate to do so, because what this allowed us to do was send basically a subset of these high potential, good potential varieties to growers across the Midwest and pay for the seed, pay for the testing costs at various time points throughout flowering. And we had a very successful year in 2021. And this growing season, we've increased the varieties to be tested from 8 to 17. And our number of participating growers is about 34 as of our last check right now. So what we do is we send these varieties out, we test them, we work with the growers, and then we try to figure out which varieties are working in different microclimates, different states, but then also determine harvest and compliance timing schedule. So, for example, will these varieties be still compliant 3, 5, or 7 weeks after flowering? And if so, which ones are they? And how can we use that data to make variety recommendations for our growers, but also help our regulators with new and improved recommendations for regulation? So that's what we're working on right now. That's the kind of the bigger projects that we have for hemp-related work in 2020.
Okay, so your farm trials, how big, if you're sending out seeds, right, how big are your plots?
It's a great question. So we are basically using a similar method that we use for our own university station trials. So in the university sites, we basically have 5 plants per replication and 3 replications. And so 15 plants for evaluation and testing. That's the same number of plants we send out to our growers. So they only receive between 4 and 6 varieties. So we don't want this to be a burdensome operation. We want this to be a nice supplement to the work that they're doing. And so we're getting 15 plants per variety, testing them for sampling for them for cannabinoid determination, and then using the remaining plants for agronomic performance data.
Awesome. I saw Paul just logged in. Paul is actually going to be our guest for our speaker this afternoon. So I need to give him a shout out real quick. It's actually, I'm checking time, 1 o'clock Mountain Time. I get all discombobulated. So just a couple of hours, but you can register on our website, globalhempassociation.org, if you guys want to join in and listen to the developing markets over there. Okay, so can you give us a little bit of feedback? I'm not sure who's listening. Obviously, I can't see everybody's face. So if you haven't said hello, please chime in. Shout out to everybody else that has said hello, besides Austin, Hector, and Randall. I saw that you were on. Natasha, I'm not sure if you're still listening. It was great to see you this morning. Robin and Christian, of course, hello. So can you break down a little bit of the differences that you're seeing maybe on, this is a pretty broad question. I'm trying to figure out how to narrow it down, but I'll just let you kind of decide how you want to answer. But some of the differences in the fiber and grain varieties that you're seeing.
Sure. There's a lot. The
Yeah.
best way I could probably describe that is last year in our variety trial, when we were out there harvesting the grain for our grain trial, we had some fiber varieties that had not flowered yet. And this was late September. And we kept them in the field, and some, as of October 1st, did not flower and produce between 5 and 6 tons of fiber biomass for that particular genetic. Now, coincidentally, those varieties were also ones that tested a little higher in total THC than our other varieties that we had listed. Granted, all this information is available on our variety testing website if you're interested in looking at some of this, how they performed, looking at if you go to either the Midwestern Hemp Database for cannabinoid data, or go to the University of Illinois Variety Testing Program for grain fiber. You'll have all of our results listed there. But that was a huge difference, is the amount of flowering and then also uniformity, right? So some started flowering in late June. So we planted them in late May, early June, and they were flowering within 3 to 4 weeks. Some did not flower until October and probably would not have flowered provided growing conditions stayed warm. But that's just one thing right there is looking at the amount of fiber biomass that they produce. If you're looking at fiber, you're looking at flowering dates and how that might interfere with other production practices, other cropping systems that you have. So that was just one thing right there. And then looking at quality of the overall material. So especially for something like grain, where we're looking at percent of oil or protein, looking at amino acid composition, there's definitely some significant variation across these varieties that are currently listed. What I'll say, though, is that we are still trying to figure out which of those varieties is considered a good model for the Midwest. They may perform well and they may do better than others, but does that mean that they're the best ones we have available? Absolutely not. We're a long way off from figuring out what that is. A lot of the ways we believe that's going to happen is through genetic improvement via breeding, and that's what we're doing here on campus, is to try to find ones that have a perfect photo period that allow us some flexibility on when to get planted, but still could produce for a very high yielding grain variety, for example. That could be something, or one that will not flower late so we can get a good harvest from a fiber crop. We're still trying to figure out what that is. I think we're a long way off from it. A good analogy I once heard was think about corn in the 1920s or 30s, and you would look at a field and you'll see pictures of it where the plants are all over the place. They're not uniform. The breeding was poor. Had significant impacts for maturity and quality at the end of the season. We're dealing with that right now with hemp, and we're just scratching the surface.
Isn't that crazy to think about? It's a crop that's been around as long as these other crops are longer than, and we're just now trying to figure out. And every time I hear this, this part of the supply chain being talked about, it reminds me, I was having a conversation with Andrew Bish about equipment, and the challenges in his role or in anybody's role building equipment right now because of that inconsistency, unlike corn or other crops that have equipment developed specific to a genetic, let alone a crop itself. And so, I think we've got a long ways to go, but it's pretty exciting watching.
It is. And that's, I think, one of the biggest draws for me was I quickly realized that everything was going to be new with this. How many times do you get the opportunity to work on something like this in this field? It's corn and soy, it's wheat, and that's just the way that the industry is shaped for commercial row crops. Is we're very, kind of got a 1-track or 2-track mind here. But to get the opportunity to work on something new, despite the many challenges that come with doing it, it's a lot of fun and rewarding when it works out.
For sure. Okay, so what have been can you talk to me a little bit about some of the things that people can find on your website? What are some of the resources that people would be able to find if they go to?
Yeah, so if you Google Hemp Database or Midwest Hemp Database, what we've done is we've tried to turn that not just into a University of Illinois resource, because we have a lot of good colleagues doing great work in the Midwest. And so Midwest Hemp Database for all of your CBD or cannabinoid hemp type trial data, in addition to the interactive database that allows you to look at variety performance. there's links to the other university web pages where they house their materials. So you could go ahead and try to find them independently, but if you do go to our database, it will give you all that information and linking it to all the universities and partnering universities that we work with and the trials associated with them. So we have our, kind of our university station trials, but then we've also put out reports that summarize the findings from the hemp database as a whole and the check program. And so we try to break it down into individual reports so you can find what you're looking for, but just understand that all the cannabinoid data that goes into our university trials, all the grower submitted data that they get by partnering with our labs and just submitting samples for analysis, and then the Cultivar check program, all of that data goes into the hemp database as a whole, so we can look at things on a larger scale and then start to focus down and really lock in what we want to assess.
Interesting. Okay, so what are some of as you've done all this research, right? What are some of the things that have really lit your fire? Like, what have you, either found that you've just had like an aha moment, or you're like, man, why haven't we been studying this all along?
I think for me right now, what really gets me going right now is trying to find ways to use this data to make it easier for growers to grow this crop, for researchers to use it. And so I'm nothing if not persistent. And so I love reaching out and trying to make new connections. That's with our regulators and trying to have open discussions about the challenges growers are facing. But the wonderful thing about this project is, and it's just a testament to the growers who saw what we were trying to do and really wanted to improve it and make it better and be a part of those conversations, which has been a driving force of what we're doing, is the grower feedback on how can we make this project better for them? How can we make the data more useful to them? How can we make it more useful to the regulators? Because you'll often find with these projects that they do them, you get a lot of great data and they just sit there and they're available, but nobody knows what to do with them or that they're available, how to use them. And so we wanted to find ways to put it out there. And so right now, trying to find a way to use this data to remove varieties from having to be sampled via performance-based sampling is something I'm really passionate about and something I like to see being done. And so the work that we're doing, determining harvest timelines, determining timelines throughout the season after flowering where varieties will still be compliant. So maybe we can remove them from having to be tested, provided we follow certain guidelines for those varieties, is something I'm really passionate about, and something I'm going to keep pushing forward with this project, with the grant funding, is can we say, for example, in just the check program from last year, 80% of the varieties we tested were still compliant before week 5 after flowering, but between weeks 5 and 7 is that danger zone where non-compliance occurs. And so maybe we can determine that varieties could be harvested within a certain timeline, and we could be confident with, let's say, 95% confidence that those varieties will stay compliant, provided they come from a particular supplier, it's a particular genetic. And so that's something that gets me going, not just for cannabinoid hemp, but something that we could apply to grain and fiber as well. Yeah,
especially, mainly because the cost, the cost of testing, for big acreage, it just doesn't make sense to me when we're cutting it and letting it rot in a field before taking it off of the field.
Absolutely. It's a totally different plant too. I mean, the research out there will show you that, typically, and this is typically, most grain and fiber varieties are just less likely to go hot. That's just the reality. On the flip side, nearly every cannabinoid hemp variety out there that's CBD dominant will probably get hot if it's not monitored properly. Now, there's some really nice genetics that are coming out, and you're seeing some low THC or CBG dominant lines that don't get nearly as close to non-compliance as their CBD counterparts. But I mean, it's just, we're learning more about which varieties are going to be problematic, which are not, and then hopefully we can find a way to maybe change things a little bit to make it easier on a grower, specifically for something like grain and fiber, where the cost of inputs and then the cost to sell that grain, for example, on a per acre basis, eating into that cost with testing is huge for a commercial grower, especially if you're growing significant acreage or growing any more than a singular variety, which in a lot of cases, growers are trying to experiment with other ones and try to see what's going to work better for them. So, I don't blame anybody for the challenges that we're facing. Regulation is set with precedent, and we're having to set that precedent now for shaping things for the future.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, so there's a comment right here, Nancy. She said, shouldn't Build Back Better include resources for producing, processing, and distributing industrial hemp? So what we're seeing a lot, and I kind of want your opinion, is where the federal government has really stepped in to do just this, or do, yeah.
Well, just even I mean, should we be including resources? We have for a brand new crop and with significant potential. I would certainly hope so, and we're seeing that happen. And in some states, for example, that are providing funds to develop regional processing. That's a cooperation with, either growers or some private entities who are really working to make this happen. But it's going to take support. The way I think about this too is the same thing with cover crops and sustainable ag practices. If you talk to a grower, and I would bet that most of the growers that I talk to want to preserve their land and do the best that they can to provide for the future. They want to protect their soils. The problem is it's not cheap. Sustainable ag practices, cover crops, those sorts of inputs, they're not cheap to do. And so incentivizing funding availability to make those things a reality, to get these things started, are the way to go. And that's really where I hope we see more on both the state and a federal level is providing these opportunities. But I'm optimistic because we didn't have states issuing grants for processing 2-3 years ago. We didn't have any of that. It took till 2022 for this to really happen. And it's small, but it's growing. And I think states are starting to understand that if they want this to happen, they're going to have to put some funds in and try to figure out how to make it work for the grower.
Well, and I think that, there's a lot of pain coming from other aspects of, inflated costs on other things. And they're like, wait, we've got to shrink our supply chain and bring, local manufacturing and, concerns with water and,
Absolutely.
Okay, so Sandra has a question really quick. She said, for research, what is your guidance on pesticides and fertilizers for hemp?
Sandra, I wish I could be a little bit more helpful to you. The problem with Illinois is that we don't have any herbicides or pesticides, insecticides that are approved for use in hemp. Some states do. I could point to Wisconsin, at least previously, under the DATCP. They had a long list of approved pesticides that may be useful for hemp. And we're seeing some research start to occur that, in the grain fiber space, that because these varieties aren't going to commercial, they're not going to be sold and they will be destroyed. There's a little bit more flexibility in doing this type of research. But it depends on where you are too. So some states don't allow it unless you have it under a research license. USDA, for example, and then the EPA had released a list of approved pesticides for hemp, but it's just kind of patchwork based off of where you are. And now with some states, like Wisconsin, for example, folding it into the federal regulation and going to be governed by the USDA, no longer the state of Wisconsin, that provides some challenges too on what is or is not acceptable. The fortunate thing is, again, working with your regulators, being clear about what you're doing and providing this under a research license may provide you opportunities to try new things that you may not otherwise be able to do under a typical commercial license.
That's good advice. And hello, it's good to see you. If anybody else has any questions, don't hesitate to chime in. I can keep talking about this stuff. Obviously, the fiber and grain side are where I want to keep going and diving into a little bit more. I really am curious where you see market pull, for research. What are some of the real needs on research side, from the market?
Yeah, animal feed. Just feed in general is a huge one. I mean, I've been getting asked about, I had growers when I first started doing these, kind of workshops surrounding hemp, and I'd be talking about cannabinoids because that was the prevailing interest at the time. There was always a handful of people there being like, well, can I grow this? Can I feed it to my animals? And right now you cannot feed it to animals for human consumption. There's a lot of studies being done and even some kind of interesting things being done in certain states like Pennsylvania and their hemp eggs, for example, that they were able to produce eggs from chickens that were producing or that were eating a hemp-based diet, for example, but that was only local and could only be sold within that certain area. So there's things that are happening. Universities getting involved, but still a big push for use of this as animal feed is really where I'm also interested. And this is just my given that I'm from the Midwest, I'm in this area where we have a Northwest Illinois, Southern Wisconsin, where we have a heavy livestock, you know, a lot of animals to feed, and we get a lot of interest surrounding that. And so, how can we use not only, you know, the hemp, the secondary like metabolites and things like that, but also what about spent hemp biomass and using these other materials that we don't necessarily think of as a potential for feed? Are they suitable for, you know, secondary or even just kind of a supplementing an already existing diet? We see this with, there's a lot of hemp spent biomass that's kind of sitting behind these processing facilities that they're looking to get rid of. And we want to find an alternative use for it outside of waste. So for me, those are some big areas of interest. That's going to take a lot of support and some, you know, folks in the animal science departments and to get involved on that. But you know, I just see such a large amount of potential for growing this hemp for grain here in the Midwest, sending it off for processing, doing life cycle analysis, and seeing how it will impact these animals in the long term, and just provide that information, because this has been done elsewhere in other parts of the world. We can eat it ourselves, but we cannot feed it to our animals for human consumption. So I just think that we need to throw some more research and time into that particular area.
It's so bizarre to me that that's a real thing, that this process takes as long as it does after the statement you just made. Like, you know, we can feed it to ourselves and it's okay, but we can't feed it to our animals that are going to be fed to us, right? So, yeah. Can you speak a little bit to what this research then does and provides to the demand back to the industry? Like, I think those of us that are in the industry understand, you know, this opportunity and what it will open up. But yeah, can you speak a little bit to,
just so I'm being clear, like the data that we're providing from these trials?
Data back for animal feed. You know, if we really start dumping into the research of the animal feed, what will that provide this industry and provide the market? Basically.
An incentive to grow something other than corn and soy, and more market balance for our reducing risk for our growers. You know, but then also, you know, we need to be able to understand realistically how much production on a per acre basis they're going to produce, how much oil is contained in those particular grains, and then how much of that, you know, after the first round of extraction, the protein that's essentially remaining. So like, we're still figuring out, you know, all of that, but what does it provide for the industry? I think it just gives them a frame of reference. You know, what can you expect on a per acre basis, and what does this mean for contracts with growers? A good example of this might be how we're perceiving what just came out with the USDA NASS survey on hemp, where we finally have some numbers over a 3-year cycle on how many growers, what's the acreage, combine that with yield per acre, and then think about how that trickles down for a production system. Because when you're putting these things, you want a formulation, right? You want to say, all right, we're going to grow X variety. It's going to be planted and harvested on this date. We're going to get about this much per acre, and it's going to produce a feed or you know, whatever product of X quality that will fit what we're looking to do and what our consumers are going to want. So it sounds basic and very simple, but the reality is we just haven't had any of this actually documented for hemp grain here in the United States or spent biomass, etc. So again, everything works on precedent when you make regulations, and we're trying to set the stage for that.
Awesome.
But it's going to take a lot of people. I mean, I'm an agronomist, so I am not an animal nutritionist. You know, we need people who are going to be able to really take a significant interest in this, and look at it from that side, not just the folks like us who are trying to figure out how to grow it. But we need their feedback too. We need feedback from the industry to say, hey, no, this variety, don't even waste your time. You know, this, because it could produce a lot, but is it of a high quality? Is it palatable? You know, is it producing any other secondary metabolites that we're not really taking into consideration that may be harmful or, you know, subpar for animal health? Those are all things that we're still just itching the surface on.
Yeah, absolutely. Another good question right here regarding fertilizer. What do you recommend in terms of synthetic versus compost manure? Are you tracking this?
So I am not, you know, really tracking this. I think I've had a really kind of how do I want to say this? The growers that I've worked with have showed a significant interest in just using organic because this is something that um, is going to be directly kind of imbibed or, for example, inhaled or extracted. And so growers like the idea of growing something organically. But for commercial production, things like grain and fiber, synthetic just makes the most sense because that's typically what they're set up to do. But looking at specific nutrients, the differences between synthetic and organic, manure, all that is not personally. I've been able to look at that really. I just know that there's a lot of interest in growers who are really trying to take this as a natural approach because as we know, hemp is a phytoremediator as well. So it will take up things in the soil, even the stuff that you don't want. So putting good stuff there and allowing it to take that up is where I think a lot of folks, and it just might just come down to, folks in this industry who have a certain mentality about growing these products sustainably and trying new things, which is what I love so much about the people who are in hemp, is that. But personally, no, we haven't really taken a look at the specifics of synthetic versus organic.
Awesome. Cool. Okay, so what have been some of I guess I kind of asked you, what have been some of your favorite, or did I ask you, in your seed trials, right? What are some of the genetics or some of the, things that have really outperformed? I don't know if you know off the top of your head.
Sure. I mean, it depends on what you're looking for. So an example might be a variety that we really liked that performs really well, but gets hot fast was, for example, Suver Haze. It's a really good performer, but it stacks on cannabinoids fast. Does that mean it's a bad variety? Absolutely not. It just means that you may be able to harvest it quicker and get it out of the field sooner. So that's an example versus something like a variety that we grew called Florence, which even after week 7 was compliant by a good margin and was just a low, steady producer of THC. So it depends on what you're looking for. Now, on the converse side of that, right? So maybe if you're up here in the northern northern Midwest area, it gets cool in early October. You don't want to be harvesting your material in October. So it could be beneficial to you to have a higher performer, one that stacks on cannabinoids faster, and you can harvest it when the conditions are more favorable. So those are things that from the seed trials, I think that are really interesting to us is it's just because they get hot faster doesn't mean that they're bad varieties. As a matter of fact, they're really nice plants. They performed very, very well, and growers want to grow them again. They just have to know that we have to maybe get these out of the field a little faster. So those are things I found really interesting is you just see this gradient of, these varieties are going to be non-compliant in 5 weeks. These ones will still be compliant weeks 5 to 7. These ones will be compliant after week 7. So figuring out this kind of range will allow growers to make their own decisions on how they want to grow these and if they want to take the risk or they want to have a staggered harvest schedule, for example, an early, middle, or late harvest and make it easier on them later in the season. Those are all things I thought that were really fascinating from the work that we did and that we're going to continue to do this year. It's just going to be exciting now to go from 8 to 17 varieties and see what's the breakdown of that. Is 5 to 7 weeks still kind of the hot spot for most of the varieties, which it seems to be, and what are kind of on the max and mins or the other ends of that, the extremes.
Right. Fred has a really good question right here. Fred, the highest grain yielding varieties like canola seem to produce the least amount of biomass. Are you seeing this as well?
Fred, that's I can't say off the top of my head if that seems to be the truth. I think if anything, it's maybe because they're being grown for grain and then being harvested as a dual purpose. So when you do that, you're going to lose some of that biomass in the fiber as it's partitioning all those resources into grain. So that might be that, and I could be wrong here, but just based off of your question, I think that might be what you're looking for is that that could be the case. So some varieties are going to be grown for a dual purpose where they're meant to be harvested for grain and fiber. Some are just meant to be grown for grain. They're going to be shorter plants that are easier to combine or harvest at the end of the season because you don't want to lift up your grain head 8 feet into the air. You'd rather have it short to the ground like soybeans or something like that. So if I had to guess, Fred, I think that would be likely what we're seeing is it just depends on the the true designation if it's a grain, fiber, grain, or fiber variety.
Okay, good, good, good. Natasha's wondering if you're writing a book yet. He's got so much knowledge and information. It's awesome.
You know, maybe someday when I can look back and just feel like we made some significant changes, I think I'll, but for right now, and I appreciate that, I'm just kind of enjoying the ride. You know, we're putting materials out, and every day is a new day with this crop. Every day is a new challenge, but, you know, maybe someday.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, I also saw, oh, Natasha also mentioned my shirt. I have to show you. These are our Moving Hemp Forward Together t-shirts. And so they're for sale with a donate, not for sale. You actually get one with a donation on our website and then on the Friends of Hemp website. And it actually goes towards our seed trials that we're doing. And so I've been really excited. Phillip actually reached out through the Midwest Hemp Council newsletter. So shout out to Jamie and everybody on her team over there as well. But yeah, our seed trials, our seeds are in the ground and moving forward. We've got 10 different locations. Melissa is just killing it with all of her work at organizing and creating the, staying in contact with all of the different researchers and certified crop consultants. I have to give a big shout out real quick because I'm extremely appreciative not only to Melissa and her team, but also IND Hemp, Almco, AgriLead, Westtown Bank, Formation Ag, and Prairie Ag, who all donated to our trials to keep them going. And so as we were talking about grants and organizing things like this, the capital that's needed in order to put together, large scalable data and fiber trials, I have to give shout out to the industry for the support for getting this going. And so until grants come through, we really rely on and partner up with our companies that support this industry and are looking to support it from the inputs, the equipment, the processing, the entire piece of the supply chain. So it's pretty exciting. And I know that you can relate to this.
I can. I appreciate you saying that because I can't stress enough how much of this is I get the fun job. I get to come out here and talk to you all and really get to share the work that we are doing, but it is a team effort. I mean, Rock River Labs out of Wisconsin, none of this would have happened if they hadn't come through when the pandemic basically shut everything down and we were going to have to cancel all of our trials for 2020. They said, we'll run the samples at cost. What were you going to run them at the university internally? We will run them for you. And then opened it up to 4 states. I mean, how awesome is that, right? So, and then our additional labs who have added on to just continue to increase our scope, Kennebec Analytical Solutions out of Nebraska, ACT Labs in Illinois, and then all of our grower cooperators. I mean, it's just remarkable. Again, like I was just saying that the class of people who are in hemp right now are the fun ones. I'm having a great time working with them because they want to try something new and they're passionate and they're willing to take some risks, but it's a lot of people putting in a lot of their energy and time into this that are making it happen. So absolutely. Thank you to all of our program collaborators, to our growers. It's amazing.
Yes, we've got, all of us have to be doing better, right? All of us have to, what is it? We rise all tides, rising tide raises all boats. Yeah. And this really, it's going to take a collaborative effort. And that's more and more what I'm starting to see and what I get excited about. And, the partners for Climate Smart Commodity, the first word on this is the partnerships and being able to develop this because we really do have to, come together to rise all tides. And so it's pretty exciting. Very, very cool. So next steps, what do you guys have planned for, next steps?
Well, we are going to be looking for more grower cooperators for next year. So if you are interested, please reach out to us and let us know that you are. There you go, Ray. Reach out to me. We'll have a conversation. I'd be really happy to talk to you about this. We want to expand our reach. We want to get more growers, more varieties in. And so just to really kind of give you an idea, just again, remember the varieties that go into our check program, we have to have some precedent. And so if you are growing varieties that you think are high potential and you want to get them into the hemp database so we can then put them in the check program, reach out to me and let me know. We don't discriminate from any states. Any state can send samples in if this is what you're looking to do and you're a hemp grower. And basically what this allows you to do is to get that discounted testing. So if you are a grower and you're looking to do this and contribute to a larger research effort, go to the Midwestern Hemp Database, apply. And if any information is given that's not listed there or you're having issues, just reach out to me and we'll get you set up. And then for the future, yeah, if you're interested in growing, reach out to me. We'll put you on our list for next year, and we're going to need more growers for next year to keep this thing going. So yeah, just participation, grower feedback. Let me know if there's any issues that you're facing with this industry, things that you are interested in learning more about. That's what we want to know so we can continue to improve these projects.
You are speaking my language. What he said. Yes, if you guys need anything as far as connections, and I always say, you know, what are some of the questions you guys have or things that are coming up often that are being repeated? Let us know, and we can get together and bring the experts on, or people that are great and have those answers, right? So we can share that information. And so don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any specific questions and or companies or people you're looking to connect with, right? Remember, this is about a network and rising all tides. We've got to link arms. And I also want to give a shout out to our members. I want to say thank you very much for all of your support. I see that there's quite a few of you on here. Sandra, I see you're on. Ray, Paul, thank you guys very much. Natasha, Dr. Hall. But you guys are who allow us to continue to grow and continue to do these seed trials and put out the work and the effort and build this network. And so I want to say thank you very much for everything that you guys are also doing. Phillip, real quick, where would you say if you were going to build processing, I'm going to put you on the spot on a different piece, right? Mm-hmm. What end market would you say is really going to be the big market to be in? You know, what end product should that processing facility or farmers be looking at, focusing on?
Oh boy, it's so region specific.
Your expertise, right?
My expertise. You know, looking for things that don't require a significant amount of secondary or tertiary processing at this time. So things like looking at hempcrete or construction materials, things made from hurd material, which are probably going to be the easiest route into a supply chain because they don't need a secondary cottonization or, you know, it's once you decorticate it and you have that hurd, it's a little easier to get that material in, and it can be used for a variety of things. Things like animal bedding, construction materials, looking for ways that you can incorporate that in, especially for me and being in the Midwest here, there's a lot of access to things like that. But I would say something right now, as these markets are developing, something that requires the least amount of external processing, and then try to get creative. Look for local partners. If you have, if there's opportunities to get this material in for animal bedding, they really like it. Try to partner with somebody local, start small, and build up a supply chain from there. I think those are huge opportunities until we can actually tell you where to go for this material and get it into products. It's just looking for areas of low risk, I think, is going to be in those types of spaces.
Okay, I like it. So how do people reach out to you? Share the website.
Yeah, absolutely. At the website, you can find me at my email is my first letter of my P and then my last name Alberti. So P Alberti at illinois.edu. That's where you can find me or get a hold of me. During the summers, I'm usually skedaddling all over the state, all over the region, but I am really good about checking my emails and getting back to folks. So always happy to talk about the work we're doing. Always happy to provide any information I can. And if I don't know the answer, typically I can find it, or I'll do my best to do so. So happy to chat with you anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining. We're almost up to an hour, and I want to real quick remind people we've got another meeting with Paul, who's actually on. I hope you're still listening. I'm really excited for our conversation about what you have going on the international markets with Ananda down in Ecuador. And then also tomorrow and Thursday, we'll go live. So we'll be with Joy Beckerman tomorrow live at the same time, 10 a.m. And then John Reed, I'm really excited with Whitefish. And so it'll be exciting to hear what they have going on as they're developing also industrial processing and markets in the Midwest. And so with Jamie Campbell, so she's a rock star. Have to give her a shout out. But again, if you guys need anything, don't hesitate to holler. Again, thank you very much to all of our members. Paul, don't be nervous. Phillip, it wasn't that bad, was it? Our interview was
No,
easy, right?
it flew by. I really appreciated the opportunity to be here. The questions and the comments, conversation, it's all great. And I just look forward to keeping this thing going.
Absolutely. Moving hemp forward together. Go buy your t-shirt on globalhempassociation.org or friendsofhemp.org, where you'll support our seed trials and research and additional information, building databases, right? It's having resources that are available to our farmers. My goal in doing this in the beginning was to be that place where people could come to find resources, not to be the expert in each of those resources, but a hub. And so being able to connect with people like you and organizations to have the resources you already do is extremely beneficial to all of our members and to everything we're doing. So thank you. Keep up the good work. We really appreciate it. And thank you very much for everybody else that's still listening. Anything else before we sign off, sir?
Nope, just thank you so much for the opportunity, and sharing is caring. So we will give out any of the information that we need. If you have questions, come to us, and if we have the information, we will provide it for you. So thanks again. I appreciate it. Hopefully I'll be back on here someday too.
You got it. Absolutely. Thank you guys very, very much. I'm going to put us in the fishbowl, and we'll see you guys later.